This time I would like to introduce our speaker, Lt Col retired Samuel Lombardo. While he's walking up, I just want to tell you a few things about him.
Just to read a few, otherwise we won't have any time for the speech.
Yes, let me tell you what, he gives a whole new meaning to an officer and a gentleman. He is a wonderful man. I'm so glad he's going to be able to speak to you today. I'll just do a few things. Has a Silver Star, Bronze Star medal for heroism. He is the Oak Leaf Cluster Army Commander Medal. He has the Army USA Good Conduct Medal, Combat Infantry Badge, Parachute Badge. It goes on. And like I said, I want the time to be spent with him. On your tables there, you have information about him. And if there's not enough, then I will make sure that you get a copy. But at this time, I want to introduce you to a true hero, a true American. And I am so proud that I got to meet him, Lieutenant Colonel retired Samuel Lombardo.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. First, I want to thank Barbara, and I want to thank the Chamber for inviting me. Up north, I did a lot of public speaking almost weekly, and I want you to know that this is not my original uniform, because I learned that if you hang them up in the closet, every 2 years they shrink for some reason. So the Heritage and Education Center Museum up at the War College and Carlisle Barracks made this for me because I did so much public speaking. And I sympathize with any teachers here, because one day I did 4 in one day at a high school, and I was bushed at the end of 4. So I can imagine what the teachers go through every day. First, before we start, I did write a book. I'm not a writer, but in 1993, it took me 2.5 years. It's my life story, up until I saw the Statue of Liberty the second time. So much after that I couldn't cover. But anyhow, it's available at Amazon for $7 to $79. The $79 is signed by the author, so I told everybody, buy the cheap one and bring it over and I'll sign it. The other is a book of poems, which is available at Barnes & Noble. And I'm donating these 2 books to the Chamber. The Barnes & Noble's over Destin. This, about 74 poems, and it covers everything from love to patriotism, inspiration, and friendship. So I think you'll enjoy it, especially with Valentine's Day coming up. I think the wives would really enjoy this book. Anyhow, I'm donating these to the club here, to the association. Okay, I'll start. My father came over as a teenager from Italy, southern Italy, in 1905. He came over with 2 brothers, and the 2 brothers, after 1 year, got homesick for the religious holidays, so they went back. So whenever we were getting ready to come to America, I asked Consul Vincenzo, I said, why did you leave? He said, I got home for the religious holidays because in America, he said, at Easter time, they worship a white bunny. And in November, they worship a turkey. So I had no idea what he was talking about. I was only 8 years old. So anyhow, we had a lot of property over there, but I wanted to mention a little bit because my whole story takes about 2 hours. And if any of you visit the World War II Museum at New Orleans, I gave them a 2-hour, and they have CDs over there, so you can pick up a CD and get the whole 2 hours. So the hardest thing I have to do is to condense it, because after 100, by the way, I'll be 100 on the 12th of July this year. So in 100 years, I have so much information that the hardest thing I have to do is condense it. So what I'm going to do is, I understand I got about a half hour, 30 minutes. We'll condense it to that and spend 10 minutes, the highlights in Italy, the highlights in America, and then the highlights during the war. First of all, Mussolini was in power, and even at 8, 9 years old, I could feel the oppression. So people that don't know what oppression is don't know what they're talking about. You know, they're talking about other countries having this and this and this. We went through it. And the one thing I remember, I was only about 8, 9 years old. We had to get out every week and stand on the road while the fascists went by. And as you know, the fascists were up almost like the Nazis were to Hitler. They were not part of the army. They were black shirts and most of them hoodlums. And every week, once a week, we had to get out and raise our hands when they passed by. And to this day, I still remember this old man who had osteoporosis, probably. He was bent over 90 degrees, right next to me. And because he couldn't raise his hand, the two henchmen came over and grabbed him by the neck and took him up to the dungeon. And we had a dungeon from 600 AD. I mean a real dungeon. And all you could see at the dungeon, it's under the basement of the police station, was a 2x2 window with bars across it, and that was the only light into the whole dungeon. So you know it's a real dungeon. It hurt me so much, but at 8 years old and 9 years old, what am I going to do? I'm not big enough to do anything, but if I had a gun, I think I would have shot the individual. That's how I felt. But every week we did that. Then the order came out, all foreign flags to be reported and announced. So they were coming around to check. So we waited and waited, and one day the mayor and two henchmen came. They looked like about 7 foot tall, all in black clothes. And here I am with my mom waiting. We had an American flag, and Dad was a socialist because he was against fascism. So we had a socialist and an American flag. So my mom gave them to me. He said, hide them in the attic before they come. So I crawled up in the attic, and the harder job was to go across. You know how 2x6s are on the attic. I had to go on my knees across. I stuck the two under my arm, and I took them as far as I could and put them where the roof meets the ceiling. I came back down, we waited, and pretty soon the mayor and the two henchmen come in, and I'm next to my mother, and she's white as a sheet and shaky. And I'm right next to her, holding on to her, and the mayor said, Senora, do you have any foreign flags to report? She said no, and about that time I pulled on her skirt and I went into a rampage. And I think I felt something was bad because I was worried about my mother. And I was only 8 years old, but I went into a tantrum, and I think the mayor and the two henchmen had enough of Sam, so they took off. So nothing happened. The other thing I had, so many things happened in my boyhood, but it helped to mold my future. We had plenty of land all around the town, one for the wheat, one for the olives, one for the wine. So one day, the closest one was a couple miles away. It was a garden area, and they were stealing our watermelons because my dad planted the watermelons right next to the fence, and they should have planted them in the middle. But anyhow, my uncle built a loft about 20 feet up in the chestnut trees and with a ladder, and my mother packed a lunch and sent me out during the summer. And I climb up there and with my lunch, and I would make noise. And when the people went around the fence next to the melon patch, they could hear the noise and they would take off. So it worked. However, this one night, I stayed late. It was about 5 o'clock and dark, and I had to come back through this trail. The trail to the right is a dead end. Trail to the left is the only way out. It very narrow, and one place was with the wall on the left. There were two big iguanas facing me, and overhang was a bougainvillea, maybe 10 feet thick of rubbish. There must have been 10 to 15 snakes hanging down. You can imagine at 9 years old, what am I going to do? So you have to reach. Remember what I did here, because later on it comes again. I reached inside of me and I said, I can't go back. I can't go over the wall because the iguanas are there. There's a wall on the right. So I reached inside of me and I bent over and I yelled, covered my head, and I yelled as loud as I could, and I went through the gamut. So when I went to the Army and the obstacle course, it was peaches and cream. I remember that. I never looked back. The other thing happened was we had two vineyards, one side, one the other. I'll tell you the one. The man would bring the wine in on a horse and a donkey in little barrels, so we put them in our cellar. And one day he came, dumped the wine in our place, and then he went to the bar. Well, 1 o'clock came around and he never showed up, and my mother was worried. I'm about 9 years old now, so he said, my mom said, and remember, mules are smarter than horses. It convinced me. But anyhow, the mule and donkey were there with the empty jugs. He said, you get on the mule, do not pull or push on the lanyard, just stay still, and the mule will take you back. It shows you. I had to go about 7 miles to this medieval town, across the river to the winery. I got up there and we went through the medieval town and across the river, and they did real well until we got to almost the other end of the river. The river was a dry river like we have in California, like some of you may have seen. Maybe we have them in Florida. In the summertime, they're pretty dry. It's a lot of vegetation. I got within a couple hundred yards from the other side, and a wolf jumps from a bush. And you can imagine what the mule and the donkey did. They jumped up in the air, and Sam finds himself on the floor of the river. And they took off. They got loose. And I started crying and running toward the winery, of course. But my uncles, believe it or not, the mule and the donkey ended up at the winery. They knew the route, the whole route, all by memory. My uncle saw this, so he knew there was something wrong. So he came down and got me, and I was running towards them. So that scared me quite a bit. And anyhow, we finally got together. We put a long line. They put a lantern in the front of the column and a lantern in the rear. And they sang the whole way across the river. And I asked them why, and they said to keep a noise so that the mule and donkey don't get shook up. We waited and waited to come to America because Dad, the last year, first of all, he had to be a citizen and to send for me, and also he had to have money, of course. So there's a picture on the table of the church. He built a Methodist church up in our area in Pennsylvania. It took him 2 years, but he also got a job in the railroad at night. So I really don't know how long he slept, but my calculation, he might have slept 3 hours in order to earn enough money to bring us over. He worked at night as an inspector in the yards in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and mason and contractor during the day. So finally he got enough money and he called for us. And we were the happiest people in the world. A chariot came up. We didn't have any autos. All you had is a bicycle once in a while. And the chariot took us down to the town, which was about 3.5 kilometers, down to the port town, and the railroad came by, and we got on and it took off. Everybody wanted to know why we left. We had everything in the world, all except freedom. Dad knew what he was talking about when he came back. What happened was that Dad came over a month before World War I broke out, and he got wounded. He got drafted in that month. The war broke out, and he got drafted. So he ended up with a wound in his leg, and it took him 2 years. He told me he went to 23 hospitals. He finally had healed enough that he took off, and those 3 years, the 2 of us were born there. So he took off, and then he got enough money to bring us over. So we got on the ship in Naples, and we started across, and it took 13 days to come over. One day I got in trouble a little bit, but I opened the portholes because I'm always inquisitive. I always wanted to know or see. They were loose. The bolts were loose, so I opened them up, but I could have easily gone through it. I was there looking like this, and all at once a guard got a hold of my feet and pulled me out of there. And he had a wrench, about a 4-foot wrench. He came around because a big storm was brewing, and he came around to tighten all the bolts. But the morning we arrived in New York Harbor, it was kind of all foggy. You couldn't see a thing. But I snuck out of my bed, out of my stateroom at 5 in the morning. It was still dark. Can you imagine a mother waking up and not seeing her little boy there? I snuck out, went upstairs because I wanted to be the first to see the Statue of Liberty. I got up there and went quietly out the door, didn't wake my 2 sisters and my mother. Went up and I got up there, but somebody beat me to it. There were about 15 teenagers already there. But it was so foggy, you couldn't see a thing anyway. So I got one of them to put me up on one of those round vents that they have that takes the air down below deck. I got on top so I could still see pretty well. Well, we waited, and finally the fog lifted up, and you couldn't see or hear a better group of people. They laughed, just sang and happy because we were there. But I think the whole contingent of the ship were up in the bow, and if we were smaller boats, I think we'd have gone to the bottom of New York Harbor. We finally got on board at Ellis Island, and Ellis Island, there are three things that keep you away. A little harder than today. Three things. One was communicable disease, which tuberculosis was very prevalent all over the world. Good character. You couldn't be an ex-con or a prostitute or a bad character. And the third one was literate. So literate, we got up to the third station, and I got a hold of my mom on the side, and I told Mom, remember that Altoona. We were going to Altoona, Pennsylvania. I said, remember that Altoona has two O's. So when she got up there, the guard said, Senora, where's the destination? She said, Altoona, Pa. We didn't want to be stuck. We wanted to pass the test. She added one word, Pa. I had no idea what Pa was at 9, but it put Pennsylvania, of course, on the address. She got it from the address. Anyhow, we got off, and the first thing Dad did, I still remember it, on the sidewalks of New York, the first thing he did, he said, remember, he said, be proud of your heritage, but our new country's America. He said, there's several things you got to do. One is to obey all the laws. Number 2, be the best citizen you can be. And third, learn the language as soon as possible. On the first 2, I did real well immediately. On the third one, I'm still putting the accent on the wrong syllable. We're still working on the language. So we got that, and pretty soon, time goes on. As you know, the dark clouds over in Europe were building up, and Hitler was getting worse and worse, so I knew the war was coming on. And my friend was in the National Guard, so he said, Sam, why don't you join? And my dad and mother didn't want me to be out of the house. He wanted me to learn the trade, which I did as a mason. I'm a master mason. Anyhow, I still joined, went down, and the first day I was there 2 hours. And guess when the day that I joined was 11 November 1939, which is Armistice Day. It was called Armistice Day. Now it's Veterans Day. So it's a day I never forget. So within 2 hours, I was in my first parade. And the trouble we had then, we had Rappel-Agans. If you had them too tight, they shut off circulation. If you had them too loose, they dropped to the floor. So you can imagine, as a recruit, a brand new man, I was worried the whole time that they would drop to the floor. So I made it through the whole hours, and I didn't know how to do right, left shoulder arm. So halfway up 11th Avenue, the commander said, left shoulder arm. It took me 2 hours to learn to do right shoulder arm. So he said, left shoulder arm. So I just grabbed it and put it over there. Well, we finished anyway. We got through. I was specialist in map reading. And during that time, for some reason or other, everybody was afraid of maps. Nobody knew a thing about maps, and I took a liking to them. So we went on maneuvers, and I was the topographical sergeant, went down to Carolinas, and you know what, how hot it can get in July and August down there. I was in a battalion, topographical sergeant for the battalion detachment, so maybe 15 people, and I took, the whole battalion went out with the 4 companies, and I made an azimuth direction for all of them. They went out miles and miles, and I gave them all a direction how to get back home. We got our own. So when we got within a hill, we walked for a couple hours, and hot as could be, drank all our water. And then there was about 100 yards of incline on a hill in a deep jungle, and Colonel Marlin was red in the face. He needed the last drop, and I was the only one that had any water left in my canteen, and I gave it to him. My sergeant came over and said, Colonel Marlin thinks that we're lost. I said, no, we're not lost. I said, I got to stick to my directions. So he convinced him that I was okay with maps. Let's stick with Sam for a little while longer. You can't believe it, it's my luck, but anyhow, we climbed the hill. On top of the hill, we look, and there's an abandoned cotton field, and Colonel Marlin's tent is right there, 25 yards from where we came out. I couldn't do anything wrong after that. He called the general right away to tell him how good his map man was, that he brought him within 25 yards. This was purely, I know we'd have hit the camp, but not that close. I couldn't be that accurate. Pretty soon I kept volunteering for the war, volunteer, and because of my map reading, I had to teach map reading at 2 posts. I couldn't get over, but finally we were in Camp Fenton, Texas, and Colonel Thompson came up and said, Lombardo, I got a levy for 5 officers. Would you like to go? I said I would never go back on my word. Of course I want to go. I want to get Hitler myself. So he put me on the list with 5 of us left. And the one story I got to tell, because it wouldn't happen today, we were going through Fort Shanks, New York for training. And we stopped in Washington, D.C., and we went to the biggest Chinese restaurant there was. We had dinner, and I remember the bill was $36. There were 4 of us. The bill was $36. So when he gave him a tip, Brian, one of our Irish descent officer, was really hot because he had been in Guadalcanal and he was already wounded. So he didn't look forward to going to Europe again. So he was really touchy. So anyway, when we got through, he gave him $1.50 change, or $3.50 it was. And the Chinese owner came up to him and he said, that wasn't enough, sir. And Brian got him by the neck, held him up, and he said, give the money back, give the tip back. You couldn't do that today. He did, so we left safely and went up to Fort Shanks, where we stayed a couple of days, and we learned how to get off a ship on a net, you know, the big net that they have in order to get on a small boat. So next day we left for Southampton, got down to Southampton, got on the ship, and we crossed over and landed at Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach, this was in October. But all the hexagons, all the barbed wire, all the obstacles were still there. We got through the wires and everything, and we camped for the overnight at a little orchard right above Omaha Beach. It rained all night, 24 hours. In the morning, they gave me 36 men to take up to Belgium, to the front line. We had, Carentan it's a terminal, rail terminal, and they have 40s and 8s, which you know, the 40 and 8s are the small cars we had in World War I. And they accommodate either 40 men or 8 horses. That's where it got its name. So I put my platoon in it, and we started going up north, but we stopped almost every few miles we stopped, and it was dark. It was dark and cold. So I told the men, I said, I'm always innovative. I said, we gotta have a stove. The first chance we get, we'll find a drum. So we got a drum, put holes on the bottom of it, and put it in the car. And I asked the other men to get down and get some stones off the railroad and put them under the drum. And we did that. And we built this fire, and pretty soon everybody was nice and cozy asleep. And I'm a light sleeper because I had 36 men in charge, so I was worried about them. So pretty soon, about 1 o'clock in the morning, I smelled smoke. We got a problem. So I looked over the drum. It was red hot under the barrel. I took a stick like this, I put it through, and it went through the floor. You know, the first thing that came to my mind was you see in the old movies with the Indian chasing the rail train with the flaming arrows. We were on fire, so I awakened everybody. We kicked the barrel out the big door. It turned out that they were not stones, they were coke that we put under the coke that they picked up along the railroad, and that was red hot. So we kicked everything out. I made a circle of men around the hole, and everybody did their duty, and we put the fire out. So then we continue on to Paris and up to the front line. There's so much to say, but I'll cut it short. We got up to the front lines, and I reported to as a replacement to the 99th Division, the 394th. That was so bad. The line was so thin, you can't believe. Right away, the company commander, it took me 2 days just to see our company, which is only 165 men. And I got up to one of the lines, and the foxholes were so far apart you couldn't see each other. And I told Captain JJ, I said, you know, I could bring a patrol through here anytime myself. I'll bring a patrol through. No wonder the Germans can get through. He said, Sam, he said, forget everything you learned at Fort Benning. That's the way we're doing it. Yes, sir. And that was all it was to it. But the Bulge would have never happened if all the lines were what they normally do as far as space. But they thought that the war was going to be over in December. That's the reason they put all the lines out. They stretched for miles. A division had 18 miles instead of 7 or 8. The whole line, so Hitler knew that. Also, the Bulge would have never happened if we had good weather. That was the worst winter Belgium had in 50 years. We had sky cover, whatever, fog and everything else for 30 days. So the Air Force would have knocked the German assembly areas out if it was clear weather. So if we had clear weather, we would have never had the Battle of the Bulge. So the day come, the first day of the Bulge, this Colonel Allen got isolated. He was up front with his battalion. For some reason, the communication was cut off, so I was called up. We were a division reserve. Usually a division has a regiment, 14,000 men for reserve. We were a company at 165, so they didn't think they needed. So we were company reserve, division reserve. So we got orders to go up and see Colonel Allen. I stopped by and got my orders. He belonged, in fact, to another regiment, 393rd, and I was 394th. So the company commander, I had a bad one. He was very selfish, thought of himself all the time, didn't think about the men or anyone else. But anyhow, he sent me in to get the orders. The S3 gave me the orders. He said, Colonel Allen had been cut off. We think a patrol came through, maybe 50 men, Germans came through and cut all the wires. So we want you to go up and regain communications. I started out the door, and the intelligence officer calls him back. He said, you better give him another order. And the other order was to replace the MLR, which is the main line. Little did he know that there was an entire Panzer division and an infantry division facing Colonel Allen. That's 30,000 men, and he wants 165 men to push him back. That's how little they knew that first day. It was hectic. So we got in contact with Colonel Allen. He only had 7 officers left, and he had a couple prisoners, and he had lost half of his battalion. So we spent the night there, and I put my platoon in a little hill. I had them all dig in, and I said, you hear these noises like an owl or squirrel? I said, they're not real. They're decoys that the Germans do to ferret us out. I said, don't make a noise to respond or anything, just stay still. We dug in and spent the night. The morning, we got orders to go back to Elsenborn Ridge and build a new MLR. That's as far as we got, Elsenborn Ridge. The Germans never broke through. There's a picture here of that's the Battle of the Bulge, and we held this corner up here. They never got past any further. So the first night there, we started digging a foxhole, and foxhole is only 4 by 4, usually, and 4 feet deep. I told my CO, I said, we better dig deeper, because when the bombardment comes, we're happy we did. I tell all the boys in school when I give them, if you have any time, even if you don't, go the extra mile. So we dug 7 feet deep. Can you imagine? He said, why are we going so deep? My command commander said. I said, wait and see. We'll need it. So all that soil we dug, the hole was 10 feet long, 7 feet deep, 2 feet wide. All the soil we dug out of there, we put in the front. When the bombardment came at 5 o'clock, it was Armageddon. I thought it was the end of the world. I think the Germans shot every cannon and every Nebelwerfer, any rocket, whatever they had, they fired. Can you imagine a bombardment lasting 25 minutes? So we kneeled on the ground with our hand over our head, he on the one and me on the other, and I said, are you okay, JJ? He said, yes. Pretty soon, the last shell, believe it or not, the last shell hit our hole. But it hit that parapet in the front, And all it did was cave in the whole wall on us, and it was like an inverted ice cream cone. All that soil was on us. So we shook all the dirt off. I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yes." "Are you okay?" "Yes." So we got out of that, and then our own, there was a minute of silence, and then our own artillery responded. And they shot for a half hour. Well, the big attack never came, so I guess we broke their back or disrupted their everything, so we never did get the attack that night. So we moved up the river after the pocket. I got homesick for our flag. I went back for supplies from the front line. We could not, people get this wrong, we were not allowed to have one. We're allowed to have one, but they're not allowed to issue one. We're not in the line of issuance like a headquarters. They're not going to issue a flag up in a foxhole. But I missed the flag so much, so I asked my commander to get us a flag. So he came back and said, "We can't have one because through channels." So that made me mad, so I said, "We'll make our own." So the first chance we got, right after the Battle of the Bulge, we were going up through the Ruhr, this beautiful mansion. I looked out the window, and you've probably seen pictures of town with every window, with a pole with a white flag, a white sheet, a white towel, anything white. When a town was captured, they hung all these white stuff out so we wouldn't bombard them anymore. So I looked up and I saw, and believe it or not, the 3x5 is what I picked, was just perfect, and it's the same, it's a standard size flag. We brought it inside. The blue was curtains from that mansion, and the pillowcase we had some fun with. Big red pillowcases are stuffed, the good homes, stuff them with eiderdown, which is a little pin feather under the goose's neck. It's unbelievable how many pin feathers they must need to fill a big pillow. But when we opened it up, you can imagine, we had a cloud, we couldn't even breathe. The GIs were playing baseball out the window. We opened the window, this cloud goes out, and the soldiers come up and say, "What gives?" And well, that was the birth of our flag. They knew what it was then. So from there on, I got my guide, who was the last man in the platoon. I didn't want him to be captured because he's the last man. So he carried a pouch with all the materials. And every town we got to, I asked my sergeant to go to the Burgermeister, the mayor of the town, and borrow a sewing machine. He would bring a sewing machine, and we worked till 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock at night. I cut the first star, and my medic cut all the rest with these surgical shears. And we worked on it. It took 2.5 months to make. And it was a real good project, I'll tell you. Going up to the Ruhr, we hit one house. There wasn't much fighting in the Ruhr because all the Germans were trying to get across the Rhine River and get a negotiated peace. But we hit this town and had a little roundhouse in the middle of it, and I had no idea what it was. So we went in, and here's a table 20 feet across, 4 feet off the ground like this, and thousands of eggs, maybe 10,000 eggs there, who knows. That was the collecting point for all the farmers. They all take their eggs there. So that was a treat. So I told everyone, we can have eggs, but don't waste any. So that was the first. Anyhow, we looked in the corner, and there's a chimney, and I thought it was a fireplace, but Sergeant Oliverio from West Virginia knew what it was. It was a smoker. So he goes over there, and he looks up, and we're blessed again. There's a nice ham up there hanging, and it's hot. People just had left. So we brought the ham over. So we had ham, we had the fat, and we had the eggs. And Sergeant Leith, I remember, ate 12 eggs. But everybody helped. I said, "We're not wasting any. Just eat what you want before we take off." The thing that took more courage than anything else, and I didn't even get a thank you for it, it's really, it's in all the magazines. The Army magazines has it now. It took more courage to do this than anything else. At the end of the Bulge on the German border, you could look over almost across the lake, 1,000 yards and 200 yards wide, and we're covered with snow, 15 inches of snow, and it's pure white, clear, clear. So we were 4 line of companies, 3 line of companies, L company, K company, and mine is I. So the first man crosses, we were given order to cross the field, and Germany's over there. It's the last day of the war, the last 2 days of the Bulge. The first man goes over, puts his foot in there, and he traps on a mine. His leg is blown, and he's there moaning. And you could hear the moan, even at that, right there. Next company, the same thing happens. He steps on the mine, the first step, and he's down moaning, and his leg blown. So then it's our turn. JJ said, Lombardo, it's our turn. So I got my scout, Sergeant Keats. I said, it's our turn, Keats. He was scouts. I said, lead off. And with that, his eyes turned opaque. I couldn't communicate with him, and he collapsed in front of me because he could hear these people moaning. Very, very devastating. So I got real in a hurry because my men were all, marching around, hearing all this noise. I don't know, I didn't want them to escape or do anything else. The first thing came to me, I said, I graduated from Fort Benning. I'm the leader. It's my turn. I'm going to do it. So I got 3 men to take the 2 men. The 1 man got hurt, collapsed to the aid station. I got all the men around me. I'm sure all of this happened within 2 or 3 minutes. I said, I will lead, but one thing further, don't step out of my footprints. So I looked up in the heavens and I said, God help me. And I took that first step, crunch, crunch, crunch. I reached the bottom, nothing happened. I did the same thing again. As an infantryman, I started with my left foot, by the way, so if that meant anything. But instead of going straight across, I took an angle, and I aimed for that bank, which was 260 yards away. It wasn't just from here to there. I took the next step, and the same thing, crunch, crunch, crunch. Nothing happened, and I did that the whole thing for 250 yards. I got up to the bank. My company commander, guess where he was? He was the last man in the line. So it was such a happy sight to see everybody in my footprints all safely. 3 days later, the snow melted. We got the March rains, the snow melted. We went up, I wanted to see what it was. I wanted to see what we crossed. There was a mine every 3 feet. There was a cargo net over the whole thing with a square like this, and there was a mine in the center of each one. So you can imagine what a feat that had to be. I know I had divine help because I had to step within inches, not to hit one in 260 yards. So we got through safely, and then we got in trucks and went down to Nuremberg, toward Nuremberg and Danube River, and I said, tonight we can finish our flag. We had to cross the river, so we had no bridges. So the engineers were building bridges all through the night with big lights. So we worked on our flag all night, and we finished it. My battalion commander wanted to borrow it. It was only one side finished by that time, and I refused to give it to him. I said, what will the Germans think? I said, one side is white. Are they going to give up? The Americans are going to give up, or they want to fight? I didn't give it to him, my battalion man. Nobody else had a flag. Anyhow, I waited until we finished it. It was a proper thing to do. We finished it and crossed the river the next morning. We rode 5 tanks. One of them was disabled. And this young, I don't think it was 19, one of my men came up the next day and said, guess who I saw? Guess who I saw? I said, who? The whole staff of Europe was there. General Eisenhower, General Bradley, General Patton, our division commander, Montgomery. They were all there online. If you only had a camera and could take pictures, that was some side. But he was so happy to see it. But anyhow, Patton asked him, soldier, how many soldiers did you kill? How many Germans did you kill? And here's a 17-year-old kid shaking. He didn't say a thing, and my division commander said he was behind him, and he went like this. So he said, lots of them, sir. He said, oh, carry on. So that was it. I was lucky that my occupation duty, I got assigned to get the building ready for the trials in Nuremberg. So every day I got to see the bad boys, Goring and Keitel and the whole works. But the first 5 rooms I had to get ready, the first one was Goring's. I got it ready, and this colonel came from Washington as an observer. He came up and said, Lieutenant, would you go through Nuremberg and get some white silk? I said, white silk? For what? He said, we want to outline the room to impress Goring. I said, we just beat the, you know what, out of him. And you want to impress him with white silk? So I refused. Of course, that was such a stupid order to put white silk on a room to impress Goring. I said, we just beat the you know what out of him. I told him another word, anyhow. We did that, and oh yes, the bottom was used as an air raid shelter, and I looked in this hall, and there must have been 25 German grandfather clocks. They were so beautiful. So I got a clockman in Nuremberg to come on and get them operating. I put the first 5 in the leaders upstairs, and the best one went to Justice Jackson, who was the chief judge. And the minute he came in, we all lined up a room. He was so attached to the clocks. They said that's his passion. He came in the room, we were all lined up to meet him, and instead of meeting us, he went straight to the clock. He was so surprised to get such a beautiful clock. So after that, he came around and met us all, and I got a commendation from him for keeping everybody. I had to take care of the Russians, the Belgium, the French, the British, and us. I'll keep them all happy in the time that I was there. So I did my best. So then I got orders, and we got down to Marseille and got on a Liberty ship. And the Liberty ship was the first Liberty ship was built in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, what's known as the Tabitha Brown. We hit one of those ferocious storms in the Atlantic, and the Liberty ships had a propensity of breaking in half. So during the storm, there were waves. I never saw waves like this, 40 feet high. And they told us where to stand in case the ship breaks in half. So we're pretty scared. Anyhow, the captain was smart enough. He made a left turn and went south, and we ended up in North Carolina. From there, he turned right again and came up to New York. So we finally reached New York after whatever days it took, and we saw the Statue of Liberty for the second time. And it meant so much to me more this time because I knew what America was all about. So what little I did for the country, I'm so happy that I contributed a little bit to preserve the greatest nation on earth, greatest democracy. Thank you very much. I do want, by the way, you got poems. I write poetry. I would want to read this poet. This is my latest. I write poetry all the time, so this is my favorite. I just wrote it this week. I arrived in America, my America. I arrived in America in 1929. I saw first the Statue of Liberty, and I knew then that freedom was mine. I lived through the Great Depression and fought in World War II. I could not have loved America more because all I heard was true. Our forefathers were dreamers and thought of trying something new, so America became the greatest nation that the world ever knew. I now felt an obligation, because of all the freedoms we have, to dedicate my life and defend our country to my grave. If all Americans carry out their duties and follow our forefathers' way, our freedoms will be protected and America will be here to stay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you very much.